So today we're going to meet Ayanna Davis. As far back as she can remember, she was just the quiet kid.
I was a very withdrawn child. I didn't speak much, even when spoken to. My way to communicate was always through art. I would draw pictures, and it would let my parents know like what I needed or what I didn't like or what I didn't want.
And it wasn't that she didn't want to talk to people.
I do remember not being able to speak. At the time, I didn't understand why I wasn't able to be verbal as a person who was verbal.
She knew how to talk, but she would just freeze. She'd have what she calls these nonverbal episodes where she would be too anxious to talk.
You know, people would talk to me, and sometimes I just look at them like they were because something was wrong with them and just walk away. And people were always like, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with her? So these little episodes that I would have, I did not, like, as a child, I just couldn't wrap my mind around, like, what was wrong with me. Like, even, like, I was like, Ursula stole my voice box, like on The Little Mermaid.
And growing up, Ayanna had a big family. Her grandmother was a very central figure.
I would talk some to them because I knew them and I was comfortable with them. I trusted them. It didn't give me anxiety to speak to them.
So the family, they understood their little girl. It was outside of the family that was a problem.
Yeah, like there was this one time.
I remember my uncles, they always had like girls over, and I was with my grandma a lot. And one of them came over. I don't remember this girl's name because she didn't last long. And I was really young. I think I was about 5 or 6. And she was like, hi. And my nickname is Yanni. And my uncle was like, oh, this is my niece, Yanni. And then, you know, and he was like, Yanni, say hi. And I just looked at her. And she was like, well, what's wrong with her? And like, she was just so caught up on like the fact that I didn't speak back to her. And she was like, well, does she know how to talk? What's wrong with her? She's so cute. How come she isn't saying hi to me?
So then what about school?
So at school, she would still sometimes just freeze up and just not be able to speak. So she just didn't want to be as social as the other kids were.
It was just always easier for me to just go sit my behind down somewhere and draw a picture. That was just easiest for me. So high school was when it was like I couldn't take it anymore, to the point where I became homeschooled. So like being at school for 8 hours, 7 hours, however long, it was mentally exhausting. So it was the social demand that I could no longer handle. As with the arts, that was like my escape.
Yeah, Ayanna's family signed her up for all kinds of arts classes, like theater. And she loved it.
Yeah, The Wiz. I was the choreographer. The thing I loved about theater is, yes, you do have to talk to people, but you don't have to talk to them as yourself. You're a character. So theater became my escape because I was a character, and me growing up misunderstood. They understood this character. So, you know, I showed up. I did what I had to do. I loved it. It was somewhere for my emotions to go.
We could sure use some company. Besides, you have nothing to lose.
I don't, do I? That was so smart of you. I wish I thought of that. Indications are it would be very advantageous for me to join you.
It helped me with my social interactions because, you know, other castmates and the directors and the staff that worked the crew, like, you know, I had to say hello, like, but sometimes I didn't, you know, sometimes I would just walk by and give them like a little wave, a very dismissive wave. And it wasn't me being mean again. It was just me trying not to go into any type of sensory overload. But I do look back and I do remember those things, and I'm just like, wow, okay, it makes sense now. You weren't crazy like everybody was saying. There was something going on here.
So Ayanna finishes high school, does some college, but she started dealing with some physical challenges.
She was living with all different kinds of pain, and she would get these seizures a lot. And she was in and out of the hospital. And so one time while she was in the hospital, she had one of those nonverbal episodes she mentioned earlier.
My doctors would come in and speak with me and my dad, and most of the time, I would just look at them and I wouldn't say anything. And so my doctors were like, they kind of didn't know what to do with me. And, so the doctors would always speak to my dad, and they were like, has anybody ever told you that she might be on the spectrum?
Okay, Leela, so here is where I want to pause for a bit. There's a lot of research that talks about autism diagnosis. The CDC estimates that autism spectrum disorder affects 1 in 44 children in the United States.
Autism spectrum disorder, that's the official name of the diagnosis, and seizures are common with people with autism.
Yeah, and so among those kids, the CDC says that overall, Black children are diagnosed later than white children. Actually, they say Black people are significantly less likely to be identified and diagnosed with autism, period, in all age groups. It's not just the kids.
So for Ayanna, she's been struggling with this since she was a kid. And now she's telling us in her 20s, they are just asking about this now. Had anyone ever even mentioned this to her before?
Well, actually, yeah.
Yes, just my regular therapist that I was seeing. We were just having a very casual conversation, and he was like, you sound like you're on the spectrum. But then I never heard a word of it from him again. The next question he asked me was, what are you going to have for dinner tomorrow? And I'm just like, okay, so you're just going to leave it at that? But since he left it at that, I left it at that. Like, I really didn't think about it again.
So it wasn't until 4 years later, when Ayanna was in the hospital, that she was finally getting evaluated. And so she got that evaluation for autism right there in the hospital.
A couple days later, they came back, they spoke to my dad, they spoke to my treatment team, and they were like, yeah, she's on the spectrum. It finally clicked in my head. This is the answer you've been looking for your entire life on why you're so different. It's like, okay, well, now you know why you have communication issues. Now you know why you're socially awkward. Now you know why you have these sound sensitivities and you only eat like 3 foods. And so it was just like, everything was just like making sense. So I had to like really fight past that denial and stop torturing myself, because once I accepted my diagnosis, it was like the most beautiful thing, and I was in love with myself.
So Ayanna finally had an understanding of what she was experiencing her whole life. That must have felt really good.
It did. But Leela, the challenges came almost immediately.
When I got my diagnosis, I was not given any resources. They did not tell me what my next step was.
So she just, on her own, started to read about autism. She watched videos of people talking about their experiences with autism. She just did it all on her own. And while she was in these online autism spaces, there was something she couldn't help but notice. She just couldn't find a lot of people who looked like her. What she did see a lot of was little white boys.
If I was white, like, because I've seen it, you get your diagnosis and you get the freaking red carpet rolled out for you. So it's just like, they don't want Black women to be the face of autism. They want that little white boy with blonde hair and blue eyes to be the face of autism, to get the sympathy.
And, if you just Google the word autism, and you could try it, you get mostly white male kids. And even in film and television, the majority of autistic characters in popular media, they tend to be white and male. I tried it. It's very true. You see very few non-white faces in that Google image search.
And so for Ayanna, she's saying that's problematic because it erases her and Black people like her. People don't see her.
Yeah, and she's really passionate about that point.
They push this narrative about autism, little white boy, white girl, genius, and like they always push the same narrative, and they're not realizing how harmful that is to the people who are not the geniuses, the people who are not white. So it's just like the narrative that the media continues to push about autism is exactly what is keeping it stigmatized.